All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Right. Thank you, Shale. And we're going to move straight to the item. Right, we have Anthony, Rachel, Letitia, Robert. No, yes, we do. We have all of them. Welcome.
Changes are up there.
Yeah. So people might want to pause before we just to read the recommendations that are up there. Okay. I think it was quite good the way it was.
I
Yeah.
think some people had struggled
okay.
seeing it. I think it's good. And then just scroll down.
Okay. Right. Well, I think we can scroll down then. What's that? No. I think that's much clearer and should be much more reassuring for the board, for the local board and the public submitters. Right, who's going to lead off? Right.
Good morning. My name's Rachel Hume. I'm from Panuku. The disposal recommendation report today includes two properties. I'll talk to one, the 200 Victoria Street West property, and my colleague Anthony Lewis will talk to or respond to questions in relation to the other one, which is 15R First View Avenue in Beachlands.
Rachel, can you just pull that whole speaker forward? Just pull it towards you.
Like that? Is that better?
It's good.
Okay. So 200 Victoria Street West in Auckland Central differs from most properties that are recommended for sale in that it is an endowment property, which is a fairly rare situation. It was vested in the council by the Crown in 1875 pursuant to the Auckland City Endowments and Reserves Act 1875, and the purpose was for the improvement and benefit of the City of Auckland. The property is subject to two perpetually renewable 21-year ground leases, which are held by the same lessee. The ground leases were granted in 1916 and are renewable at the lessee's option. Any alternative use or redevelopment is obviously constrained by those ground leases. Auckland Council owns the land only, which has a rating valuation of 8.8 million. The improvements are owned by the lessee, and the lessee has inquired about purchasing the land. A sale of the property is not expressly prohibited by the Endowment Act, and the property can be sold under Section 140 of the Local Government Act 2002, subject to the conditions set out in Section 141 of that Act, which are that the proceeds of sale must be used for a purpose that is consistent with the purpose of the endowment. So in this case, that is for the improvement and benefit of the City of Auckland. And the other condition is that Council must notify the Minister for Land Information and the Minister for in charge of Treaty of Waitangi negotiations of the proposal to sell the land. As part of the rationalisation process, consultation on the proposed disposal of 200 Victoria Street West was undertaken with council departments, CCOs, iwi authorities and with the Waitemata Local Board. Through that process, no current or future service use was identified. No cultural or commercial interest was received from iwi authorities, and the Waitemata Local Board resolved to support the proposed disposal. Because 200 Victoria Street West is an endowment property, a use or uses of the proceeds of sale that is consistent with the purpose of the endowment must be identified before the property can be sold. So, as you'll see, the recommendations contained in the report are twofold. So the first part, Panuku is recommending 200 Victoria Street West be considered by the Council for disposal. And secondly, the Council's finance team has made recommendations for the allocation of the proceeds of sale from 200 Victoria Street West by reviewing existing projects in the 10-year budget. A colleague, Robert Irvine from the finance team, is here to respond to any questions around the use of sale proceeds. So as you'll see, the two projects recommended by the finance team to receive proceeds of sale are the development of the civic space at 254 Ponsonby Road, up to a value of 5.5 million, and the balance to the Victoria Street Linear Park project. I don't need to say the next bit because it's been taken out. So I guess the next steps, if the property is approved for disposal, then the next step would be Panuku would proceed with the disposal in accordance with Section 141 of the Local Government Act, which would be starting with notifying the ministers, relevant ministers. Unless ready to take questions around any questions around the disposal recommendation itself, I'm happy to respond to those, and Robert can respond to questions around the use or allocation of sale proceeds. Thank you.
Okay, well, the report is about two properties, so we'll have Anthony just discuss the other one. Is it? Yep.
Sure. Thank you. So the second property, as mentioned, is 15R First View Ave. It is a narrow 2.5 metre strip of land resulting from an unformed access way. It was vested with the Crown originally upon subdivision and then later vested with the former County Council in 1963. The former Manukau City Council actually revoked reserve status in 1977 for the intention of a sale, but that never eventuated. Recently, a purchase inquiry was received from the adjoining landowner. Upon further assessment, we've discovered that both adjoining landowners have encroached on the site. The property was followingly assessed for recreation purposes. It didn't deliver any linkages. It didn't provide any usable open space. It was then subject to the rationalisation process. It's gone through that process. We haven't been able to identify any alternate uses. The Franklin Local Board has resolved that it endorses the disposal. One iwi entity did express commercial interest. Upon further communication, we did identify that the site is 2.5 metres wide by about 50 metres long. That does severely limit development opportunities. If it's approved for disposal, we'll follow up that iwi entity just to advise them that, given the nature of the site, can really only be disposed of to the adjoining landowners. Thank you. Ready for questions?
Member Coker.
Kia ora, thank you for the presentation. Two questions. So the first one is around, you said that there was no notification button. I just hear what you just said around the First View Ave property. So you did get, was that Ngāti Whanaunga?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep, okay. All right, so in terms of when you get no response from iwi, can I confirm, did they acknowledge receipt of the opportunity?
Through the chair, we send out an initial notification, and then we always followed up when it approaches the close date, and we would record if any response was received, saying yes, a response received, negative, or if there was no response received at all, we'd list that.
So from your perspective, there's no missed opportunity there from iwi, that you're quite convinced that they have the opportunity to input, and certainly Ngāti Whanaunga did for the one out Beachfields.
Yeah, through the chair, that's primarily for our cultural significance issues consultation. Whenever a property is approved for disposal, we always notify all iwi groups again, saying the property is coming onto the market. There's actually a second opportunity.
The second question through the chair is just in relation to the ihumātao precedents that are being set. What's the history with these two pieces? And I'm going to ask this question for every property that we're going to be talking about today through the chair. In terms of, was this acquired under Public Works Act or any properties like that?
Through the chair, so 15R First View Ave was from a private owner who vested it with the Crown upon subdivision. So we have checked, it's not confiscated land.
And I can respond to the same question in regards to 200 Victoria Street West. We did investigate that for the same reasons you're talking about, and it was discovered that that the property was acquired In 1840, legitimately, it was not confiscated land or reclaimed land, and a sum of money was paid at that time for it.
Or acquired under the Public Works Act?
No, it wasn't acquired under
Okay,
the Public Works
thank
Act, no.
Could all presenters just answer that question so I don't have to answer it again? Thank you.
I think we are prepared for that. Right. Yeah. Robert, could you just explain better than I tried to explain to Shale and the local board why we've had to, in B, name some properties specifically, and what does it mean going forward if there was a recommendation or desire by the local board to change the remaining balance going to Victoria Street Linear Park? What would they have to do? What would we have to do in order to change that allocation?
So through the chair, the process we followed with identifying the projects, effectively what we did first, or start off, was whether we could reserve the funds as part of the sale process. And legal advice has confirmed that we can't do that. We need to actually nominate and specify the projects that are identified. So through that process, we looked at the basic projects that have already been formed with the council. We weren't creating anything new. We were looking at identifying projects that are well versed across the council. Then looking at the two that we've put forward, one was obviously the 254 Ponsonby Road, so as one local initiative of high importance. We're also recognising that, we looked at the ENC paper from December. We identified that there was a budget shortfall, and this was a way to then help ensure that it's actually meeting some of those, challenges. The second part was for the Victoria Park Linear Park. So effectively, we're not certain on the amount of money that we will receive from this fund. So we basically had to then cap the one project at an amount, and then effectively the balance is then applied to Victoria Linear Park. Now that project is going through a design stage at the moment. It's earmarked for, I think, between 2020 and 2022. The current budget sitting in the LTP is around $32 million. We know that it's been worked through, so the process we followed with this is then, identifying that project, knowing again that has quite significant benefits for the City of Auckland. So that's why that one was identified. Now, if we had to choose to change one of those projects, we would then have to come back to committee. Now, the issue would be then we would then hold up the sale process, and Panuku can, talk around the impact if we had to choose to come back to committee at a later stage, which I believe could be as late as February next year.
But just to put a finer point on that, we can still approve this, and the sale goes ahead and it frees up the money for 254 Ponsonby Road. But if the local board wish to come back to reallocate the remainder, for example, to Three Lamps, the project there, that is not going to hold anything up, is my understanding. We're just coming back with a different recommendation.
I can respond to that. If the reason for needing to identify the properties is because the advice that, so the notification to the Minister of Land Information and the Minister in charge of Treaty of Waitangi negotiations must identify the particular projects it's going to, and that has to happen before the property can be sold. So does that answer the question?
Okay. Yep, that answers. Okay then. All right, we have Councillor Casey, Councillor Watson, Councillor Bartley.
Adam, I'm interested in this long strip of land that's been colonised by a couple of householders. How do you divvy it up if both householders are interested in buying it? And doesn't it set a precedent for anybody else who's encroached on council land to sit tight because they'll get it in the end?
Yes, through the chair, Panuku did work closely with Council's Land Advisory team looking at a resolution. This seems the most pragmatic approach. We'd probably talk to one landowner at the moment. I believe the two adjoining property owners have got some sort of arrangement made, but without a mandate to progress the disposal, our hands are tied at the moment.
And just a comment on the precedent. I mean, there's lots and lots of people have encroached on council land.
Yes,
and
that's
this is
correct.
almost ticking it off, saying if you sit there long enough, we'll give it to you in the end.
I'm not aware of specifics, unfortunately. I can look at other examples for you. This is seen as the most pragmatic approach at minimal cost to council.
Councillor Watson.
My question goes to how much the council receives in leasehold income from 200 Victoria Street West. How much do we get a year from that?
Through the chair, the details of the lease are commercially sensitive and confidential.
Okay, so
Through the chair, just to follow up on that, we can disclose them to the committee, but not in a public forum.
okay, so I guess, Mr. Chair, from my perspective, this presents a little bit of a challenge because we're agreeing to sell a property without knowing how much we receive from it in income, which is, of course, an important consideration as to the value of the transaction to the ratepayers of Auckland. And the reason I bring it up is because there have been instances previously where the leasehold income is left out of the equation, whereas it should be an important consideration that we should be made aware of. So I'm putting that on the table. My second question and related question goes to what the value of the sale in at least rough terms is anticipated to be, because I know, again, we're often not told that, but we have had a number of instances in the past where the sale value has been subject of controversy. So do we have an anticipated value in mind that we'll be receiving from this sale?
Okay, well, we'll just take the other questions and we'll defer this item for confidential later on. It's no problem. We have to go into confidential if you want that information, so it's as simple as that. We will have to defer the item, and then when we go to the confidential section at the end of the meeting, we can relitigate the item. That's what you're asking.
Well, it's not a matter of being awkward, Mr. Chair. I think that's an important consideration.
Yeah, but I'm telling you what we can do. That's as simple as that. If it's a desire that the majority of the committee want that, well, we'll do that. It's nothing. We're not trying to do anything shifty here. We're just trying to make something happen for the local board. But that is a good point, and we will deal with that. So I'll go to Councillor Bartley and Councillor Lee, and if there's no one else, we'll then defer the item for the confidential section. Right? Okay.
My second question goes to the anticipated value of the sale.
Yep. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we do end up selling, I just want to know how confident you are that the proceeds can be used for the park in Ponsonby, given it falls outside the definition of City of Auckland in the Municipal Corporation Act.
Through the chair, yes, we did get that reviewed by the Council Legal Services team, and they also received external legal advice on that, and even though it is just outside, they're comfortable that it still meets is consistent with the purpose of the endowment, because it could be considered that people within the area of the City of Auckland in 1875 are very likely to use the civic space at 254 Ponsonby Road. So we have had that thoroughly reviewed by legal, and we're comfortable that it is appropriate.
I had another question. Is it correct that the obligations under the endowment will not pass on to the purchaser, therefore they're going to be able to redevelop that site and make a lot of money?
Through the chair, the obligations for the endowment are with the council, where at the moment the lessee who has approached us about potentially purchasing the site can actually develop it in any manner that they want because they have the rights under the lease. So that can happen regardless of whether this land is sold or not. Because we don't own the improvements on the site, so they belong to the lessee. We own the land only.
And my last question, please, Mr. Chair. Why haven't you presented us with other options of properties, given the comments from Shale earlier about a property they had in mind?
Through the chair, the disposals recommendation reports are they begin with identifying properties for disposal. The only reason that this one is the use of the sale proceeds is being discussed is because it is an endowment property. So usually any properties we're recommending for sale, if they're not endowment properties, the sale proceeds would go straight into LTP funding.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you. My question was to be about the lease, and I understand the lease, interestingly enough, going back to 1875, is very sensitive and confidential, which is intriguing, isn't it? So the chair has, because it is so sensitive, despite all these figures thrown around in here, how much money we're going to get out of the disposal, that bit is the lease and the income from the lease is highly confidential. But we'll wait until the confidential section to hear those details. However, when exactly was the lease last renewed? And when is it due for renewal?
Through the chair, there are two ground leases. One was due for renewal in 2017 and the other one is due for renewal July 2019, so they're both current. But any further details than that, we'd prefer to leave to confidential section.
Okay, now the idea of disposing, as you call it, selling this land, did that come from Panuku or did that come from the tenant, also known as the landlord?
Through the chair, this particular property, it was investigated in response to an inquiry from the lessee. However, it could just as likely have been identified through Panuku's normal portfolio review process, but in this instance, it was in response to a purchaser
It's
inquiry.
a very happy coincidence, isn't it? Can I ask you, who is the lessee? Why, is that confidential too?
Through the chair, the lessee is VQ Holdings Limited.
Say that again.
VQ Holdings
And
Limited.
who was that?
I'm not unsure I understand how you'd like me to explain that further.
Is that Mr. Russell or?
You don't need to. Any further questions, Councillor Lee?
Looks like I'll have to keep my further questions to the confidential section.
Okay, all good. Right, well, I'll move this, and Councillor Simpson, you'll second this deferral, defer to the item in the confidential section. You don't have to, Councillor. There you go.
I'm happy to defer it because I think that councillors are entitled to that information. But, Mr. Chairman, is it better to leave it to the end, or would you like to clear the room and should we deal with it now? That might make, just as I know it takes another 5 minutes to clear the room, but why don't we just deal with it now? I'm happy to second your motion to clear the room now and we can get the information on the table.
All those in favour? Okay, right, we have a 5-minute break and we'll clear the room. You may remain, yep.